Well, it's a tough act to follow the Quran, but I will do my best. The freedom of speech is our fundamental bulwark against tyranny. It is the one protection that we have in the United States and in other Western nations to varying degrees, and in other nations around the world in some places. It is our fundamental protection against the government being able to do whatever it wants and to crush dissenting voices. Any group that is beyond criticism, any individual or group or policy or belief or anything that is beyond criticism can work its will without hindrance upon those it opposes. And that is the very definition of tyranny. We are far closer to this in the United States today than most people realize. People say, well, we have the First Amendment, and so really you got nothing to worry about because this First Amendment guarantees the freedom of speech, and therefore no tyrant will be able to crush dissent and work his will untrammeled upon the American people. But the thing about the First Amendment is that it doesn't enforce itself. It doesn't interpret itself. It does not protect or defend itself. And it can be legislated away just as much as the Second Amendment has been in many areas of the United States. If you want to buy a handgun for your own self-defense in New York City, or probably Los Angeles, you're out of luck. You can't do it, and you can say all you want that you've got a Second Amendment right to bear arms. Nobody cares. There are all these exceptions to it. The same thing not only can happen, but is happening in regard to the First Amendment today. And it is happening in particular and by the energy of, most notably, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is the 57 government Muslim body that is the largest voting bloc today and has been since the collapse of the Soviet Union in the United Nations. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has been embarked for several years now on a concerted and active effort, a multi-pronged, multifaceted effort to destroy the freedom of speech in the United States in particular and in the West in general, and to compel Western states to criminalize criticism of Islam. And the reason why they want to criminalize criticism of Islam is because criticism of Islam is forbidden in Islamic law. If I were to stand up and say that this section of the Quran that was so ably recited by Kasra is hateful because it enjoins warfare upon Jews and Christians, in verse 29 that was up there before that, and that it says that the Jews and Christians are under a curse because they believe, supposedly the Jews believe in Ezra as the Son of God, at least so it is asserted in this verse, and Jesus as the Son of God by the Christians, they are under Allah's curse. If I say, well, that's a hateful thing to say and can incite to violence, well then that, under Islamic law, is blasphemy and carries the death penalty. Thank you. Now, in Islamic law, criticism of Islam is forbidden, particularly to the unbelievers. The unbelievers, as we saw actually in the verse that preceded this, which says, fight against those who do not believe in Allah and His Messenger, and do not forbid what He has forbidden, even if they are of the people of the book, until they pay the jizya, the tax, with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. The Jews and Christians, the people of the book, who have to feel themselves subdued under Islamic law, enter into what is called the zumma, or the dhimma, the contract of protection. The contract of protection is kind of like the contract of protection that Don Corleone offered to the shopkeepers in Lower Manhattan. If you don't get out of line, if you pay into the system, you will not be killed. If you do, your life is forfeit. The non-Muslims who submit with willing submission, they pay the tax, the jizya, and they feel themselves subdued. Their lives are protected in the Islamic State. But if they stop submitting and feeling themselves subdued, and if they start to speak out and say, wait a minute, this is unjust. I believe in equality of rights of all people before the law, and I'm being oppressed, then their lives are forfeit. They are not submitting. They are not feeling themselves subdued. Criticism of Islam is forbidden as an act of rebellion by the non-Muslims under Islamic law. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation is trying to bring Islamic law to the world, because the Organization of Islamic Cooperation obviously believes that Islam is the true religion and that all of us would benefit from living in an Islamic state. They are trying, because they cannot, the Islamic states of the world cannot militarily conquer the United States or Western Europe at this time. They are trying by various other means to bring elements of Islamic law to the West and impose them upon us. Principal among these is this Islamic blasphemy law, that criticism of Islam ought not to be allowed and is punishable by death. In accord with this, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has introduced, for several years running now, non-binding resolutions at the United Nations calling upon member states to criminalize what they call incitement to religious hatred. There have been various formulations of this. That's one of the most recent. Defamation of religions is another, religions in the plural, although the only religion that ever gets its nose out of joint after being supposedly insulted is Islam, so we all knew what they were talking about. But in any case, the resolutions were always opposed by the United States on free speech grounds. And they were saying, if any group, if any idea, if any ideology or belief system is placed above criticism, then from that privileged position, it can work its will untrammeled on the rest of us, and that would be bad for free societies and free people. However, last year, the Obama administration signed on to the latest of these resolutions, Resolution 1618, at the United Nations, and it was passed. Now, the United Nations, at this point, this is a showdown that's going to have to come, because the U.S. Constitution says that treaties that the U.S. signs have the force of law in the United States. And so what the showdown has to happen is, will the United Nations rulings supersede the U.S. Constitution? That has not yet been decided, but it's coming down to it. Because Resolution 1618 binds the United States to work toward criminalizing criticism of Islam or incitement to religious hatred. Now, it's the same thing. Obviously, nobody is in favor of hatred. Lots of people think that I am. It's not true. But hatred is the means by which this whole tyrannical idea of restricting the freedom of speech is advancing, by calling it hate. Hate is in the eye of the beholder. I can say that that's hate, and you might say, if you're a Muslim, no, 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 that's the beautiful word of Allah. And it's not hate. Who gets to decide? That's the key question. Who gets to decide what hate is? They're the ones who have the power. They're the ones who are in control. The people who get to decide what constitutes incitement to religious hatred under Resolution 1618 of the UN, they are the ones who are defining what is acceptable thought and what is not, what is acceptable in the society and what is not, and they are the ones who have the power, in other words, to control and restrict the freedom of thought and thereby the way in which the society develops in innumerable ways, since obviously if some things are forbidden to be thought, then they're not likely to lead to policy. So anyway, the United States, the UN resolution says, well, countries that have things like the First Amendment, they obviously have to respect that, but they need to work on ways to get around it. And of course, Hillary Clinton famously said that in the United States, of course, we have the freedom of speech, so we need to practice good old public shaming of those who get out of line, as if this were, I don't know, colonial Massachusetts, and what are you going to do? Put the Islamophobes in the stocks? But in any case, public shaming, she said. But obviously all this is moving toward restricting the freedom of speech. All it takes is a hate speech law. And here again, whatever is hate is, whoever decides what hate is, they're the ones who are really the tyrants in control of the whole public debate. The hate speech laws have already come to the United States in the guise of hate crimes laws. There are already hate crimes laws on the books. The hate crime works like this. If I beat you up and steal your wallet, that's a crime. Don't worry, I won't do it. However, if I beat you up and take your wallet while calling you a racial slur, that's a hate crime. That's the way the United States law works right now. So hate crime obviously depends upon speech. And there is forbidden speech in the United States. All you need is 5 Supreme Court justices who will say, yes, we have the freedom of speech, but criticism of Islam or defamation of religions or incitement to religious hatred or whatever they want to call it is hate speech and does not enjoy freedom of speech protections, and that's it. Now, the insidious thing about this is that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has explicitly added counter-terror analysis to its list of things that are offensive and criticizing of Islam. Because obviously, if the Muslim terrorists are shouting Allahu Akbar and quoting the Quran before they kill people, well, if you're going to analyze their motives and goals and beliefs so as to be able to defeat them more effectively, you have to go into Islam. But if that's hate speech and it's not allowed, then those same terrorists can go ahead without anybody stopping them, because we're not allowed to discuss what they're all about. We can't understand them. We're forbidden to understand them. And that is actually the case in the United States today. The Obama administration has carried out a systematic purge of counter-terror material used by the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Homeland Security, in order to separate out anything having to do with Islam from counter-terror analysis. Now, that's fine if all the terrorists were really the right-wing extremists of Janet Napolitano's nightmares. But if you really do have Islamic terrorists blowing things up and quoting Quran in order to justify doing so and to gain new recruits among peaceful Muslims, well, then we got a problem. And the problem is worse than that, too. Recently, of course, it's been in the news that there was this attack in Benghazi at the consulate. 4 Americans were killed, and it seems as if the Obama administration knew right away that it was Al-Qaeda and covered it up. And the extent of which this is an issue or a political football or anything like that, that actually is not really something that concerns me. What concerns me about this is that it was covered up in the way that it was. Because one thing we do know that they did not kill Ambassador Stevens and the 3 others about was this Muhammad video. This Muhammad video had 17 views on YouTube when it became an issue. Yeah, you can look it up. And nobody cared about it. There are also thousands of things like it on YouTube. Search around and you'll see. So why did the Obama administration, if they knew from the CIA that it was Al-Qaeda right away, which seems to be the case at this point, why did they come out, and all of them, Obama, Clinton, Susan Rice, Jay Carney, and others, they all said, it's the video, it's the video, it's the video. People were enraged about this video. The tacit lesson there, the signal, the implication, the subtext is, it was our fault. If we would just shut up about Islam and stop bothering them about Muhammad, then the ambassador would be alive today. It's up to us. And this is the lesson that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation is actively trying to teach, as absurd as it sounds.